Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are heading up to Los Angeles and we're going to discuss communications and public relations and also what it's like to just be able to make a difference in people's lives and give them hope and inspiration and give them some tools to make their life better. Our guest is Ross von Metzke. He attended San Diego State from 1997 through 2002, and he is now the Senior Director of Communications and Public Relations for the It Gets Better project. Ross, welcome to the Where You At podcast. It is great to see you and talk to you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for thinking of me. This is cool.
Well, all the praise goes to our dear friend, Jessica Yedigaran. Ross and I have been trying to figure out if we actually have met in person before, but we both know Jessica, and I know that I always heard about you, and she recommended you immediately as a guest. And I love it when friends and alums can recommend one another and help each other out. And so I'm glad that our friend Jessica has been able to connect us.
Well, Jessica was literally how I got through my freshman year. So she gets a lot more credit than just this. We'll get into her in the future, but it's amazing. She's an awesome human being.
Yeah, she really is. She was one of the first guests on the podcast. So, all right, let's start with you're in college, Ross. You're working at the Daily Aztec with Jessica. You worked at the arts and entertainment section. You worked in the opinion section. You worked with the Society of Professional Journalists. What did you think you were going to do with your life after college? And if it's different, what did you hope that you were going to do with your career after college at that time?
Oh, I was going to be the editor-in-chief of a magazine in New York City. Like, there was no question. That was the plan. And so I don't even think my first semester had started yet. I drove myself out to San Diego State. Somebody had told me that, the staff of the Daily Aztec started a week before school started so they could start working on the first issue. And I said, screw it. I'm just going to walk in there and see if they'll let me write for the arts and entertainment desk. And I knocked on that little front window, if you remember, in the basement of the business administration building. And they were like, wait, you haven't even started yet? And I was like, yeah, here's my portfolio. And I had it like all set up and I like slid it through the window and I waited in that hall. And Jessica Yedigaran came out the back desk and she's like, are you really an incoming freshman at 18? And I was like, yes, I am. And she's like, come in here. And she hired me on that day. But I was always that, like, I knew what I wanted to do before I went to college. Like, there was a period of time where I was like, do I even want to go to college? Can I do this without college? The answer, of course, is probably not. I needed to be there. But yeah, I knew that was what I was going to do from the time I was like 15 years old.
So this portfolio that you had compiled before you even got to San Diego State, was this high school newspaper? What was in the portfolio before college?
Well, I was really, really lucky. So I went to the School of Performing Arts in Bonita, and they had a really great journalism program. In addition to that, I did acting and singing. Like, I was the total theater kid, but also loved writing. An after school program, there's a place in San Diego called San Diego Junior Theater, which is a theater in Balboa Park, an after school program where they put on plays and musicals, you take classes, all of this stuff. I was just always very into it. And one of the parents of one of the students there was actually an editor of the Union Tribune. And I started talking to her my junior year about really wanting to get into journalism. I started showing her some of my writing. She actually oversaw the family current section that featured teen writers. And so I got a column in the Union Tribune as a junior in high school, just kind of writing about the high school experience, like college application process, all of the things that teenagers are going through, is sort of almost like an explainer to parents. And then I was also a youth movie critic, which is kind of crazy at the Union Tribune. So they would send me out to review movies that they felt like the 30 and 40-year-old movie critics, like, this movie's not for them. So maybe we should have like a 17-year-old review it. So yeah, I came in with like actual newspaper clips. I think that was kind of the shock of, wait, what? But it was also a lot of luck.
So you have this goal. You're going to be the editor of a magazine in New York City. What was your plan for how to go about doing that? And then how and why did the plan change as you started to try to do this plan?
So Jessica, when I got to get these years right. As a junior going into her senior year, Jessica applied for an internship in New York with the American Society of Magazine Editors. And it was an amazing internship where you went and lived there for 11 to 12 weeks. You got paid like an actual decent stipend. I think at the time it was like $450 a week, which if you're a college student, that's not bad.
Right. Yeah.
You still have to pay for your housing, but it's not bad. And you get put at a magazine and you basically shadow them for 12 weeks. And I have got to be honest, I feel terrible. I cannot for the life of me remember where they placed Jessica. It was a pretty established magazine. I'm sure it's on her LinkedIn, but I cannot remember. But I remember thinking, this is amazing. And so if Jessica was a junior going into her senior year, that meant I was a freshman going into my sophomore, because I was 3 years younger than her. So then when it came time to apply, you had to be a junior going into your senior year, but I was only a sophomore going into my junior year. And she said, just leave your age and your year off of it and just apply the clips and see if they say anything. And I did, and they didn't ask, and they picked me. And I went a year too young and a year under where I was supposed to be. And I got placed at YM Magazine, which was young and modern for teen girls. It was like the alternative to 17. Perfect place for a gay college student to be. It was like the height of Total Request Live. So I got to go to TRL with like all the teen stars. This was like the height of Britney, Christina, the boy bands. I was like in heaven. And it came back to San Diego State after that internship. And I was like, I am going to rock these last 2 years as fast as humanly possible and get back to New York. And this is where the story turns sad, because I would have graduated right after 9/11. And as most people know, 9/11 decimated the magazine industry. And it just wasn't the business that I had dreamed of going into anymore. There weren't any jobs. Like even people that I met while I was out there, I got to freelance. I came back to San Diego State, but freelanced for New York magazines, for YM, Entertainment Weekly, and a few others. But like my editors were getting laid off, and all of the contacts that I'd met were getting laid off, or magazines were being merged into each other and they were getting downsized, and people were taking like pay cuts and demotions to stay in the city. And I really wanted to go back, but like financially and emotionally, it just didn't make any sense to me anymore. And so I stayed in San Diego. I freelanced for the Union Tribune, and like an idiot, started my own magazine with a friend that was by the gay community, for the gay community. And we put out 8 issues before that went bankrupt. And, I tried the dream. And then I moved up to LA because it just made a lot more sense than going back to New York.
Let's go a little bit more about 9/11 and just the impact that it had on a lot of us and our view of the world. I know that I was working for a newspaper at the time, and how much it changed the newspaper industry and how much it changed going through airports, and just, oh my goodness. As you're saying this, I'm flashing back to my own experiences with 9/11. And so as someone who's still in college, what are you thinking about in terms of slowing yourself down because of it?
It was a really interesting time. I had a really interesting experience with it because I had friends in college in New York when that happened. I mean, I remember the day was devastating, obviously. My mom can be a little bit theatrical, and I remember she left a voicemail, and I got it when I woke up, and she said, by the time you get this message, our world will have changed. It was just ominous, but there was no reference, and I hadn't turned on the TV yet, and then I saw the TV and I went, oh, well, okay, she's right. That wasn't completely inaccurate. I just think a lot of things changed for me. At the time, my boyfriend at the time was not born and raised in the United States. Like he had spent a lot of time here as a kid, but he was born and raised in Mexico. So he had a very different worldview of 9/11 than I did. And it really, I honestly think that moment and some college classes I took after really kind of changed how I viewed this world and how I viewed, my place in it. Me just going out there and kind of being a fluffy reporter that wrote about entertainment and fun stuff kind of changed I think, me into going on a path of wanting to use journalism and my writing ability to do something different or to change things for people and make a difference. I don't know anybody who was old enough to really understand what's going on who wasn't changed by that.
When you start your own magazine, even if it doesn't last for very long, however many episodes or magazines you put out, it helps you. It helps you learn things. What were some of the lessons that you learned from publishing your own magazine that stick with you now and that helped you get to the different places you got to?
I learned how to live very cheaply.
It's really important for a journalist.
I think something that I learned from that is I don't get taken advantage of, and I know when somebody is not being honest with me. Because when you start something like that, and not to knock any magazines folks have put out, but like, we were very fortunate. We got like solid funding and actual advertisers and put out like a slick, glossy publication that went nationwide. Granted, it was a niche publication, but it did. And so everything from going to the printing press to dealing with graphic designers to dealing with, freelance writers to dealing with payroll to dealing with all sorts of things. People get into this and they don't really know what they're doing, myself included. And so you kind of have to learn by failing, and you fail up. And I think when you take on something that big at that young an age, even if you fail, it teaches you that you can kind of handle just about anything. There are times when I get kind of, well, what am I doing with my career? What's my next step? Or am I doing this right? And I look back and I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking at 22 years old trying to start I don't know. I think I didn't know any better to be scared of it. I just went for it. Whereas as you get a little bit older, you get a little bit more reserved and fearful. And I kind of lean back on that and go, well, you've already done something completely insane. So you can probably get through this too.
So you said you moved up to Los Angeles because it made sense. What's the process like of looking for jobs, applying for jobs? Where do you begin? What do you do next?
I talk about this a lot. My entire career is sort of an accident. Like it all happens, and people are going to listen to this and be like, what the hell? I can't believe this guy. I've been on maybe 4 real job interviews in my entire life. It's always been about networking, meeting people, figuring out who are the people and what are they doing that I want to be a part of. And so I was working on this magazine. There was a group of guys that ran a series of websites in LA. It was the Gay Wired family. They're gone. They got absorbed by the Advocate, which is how I wound up there. But they were doing some really cool stuff in the travel, entertainment, and news space, and they needed a writer. And somebody named Ross had emailed them asking about jobs, and the publisher called me and said, oh, I got your email, but when I emailed back, it bounced. And I kid you not, I said, I didn't email you. It's not me. It must be a different Ross. Within 2 months after that, things at the magazine, it was clear financially that this was going south, and there were some people involved in the fundraising and investment side that were doing some kind of questionable stuff. And I decided I needed to get out. And I think at that point, I was 25 or 26, and I was just like, I think I've outgrown San Diego at this point. I think I want to try a bigger city. And so I called him back and I was like, remember that ghost email you got that you thought was me? Well, now I'm serious. Like, is that offer still on the table? And I moved up there within a month and just started working for them and cranking out articles for this website. And anybody who's worked for that was around the time, because I was still freelancing in San Diego, and another SDSU alum, Jennifer Croshaw, was editing, what was the San Diego Union Tribune's website? Not the Reader.
Voice of San Diego.
Yeah, but there was another, it was like SD, I can't remember. She was an editor for it. And I was still freelancing for her. I'm sure if I Google her name, it'll come up. But there, I remember her telling me, yeah, I have to crank out 7 articles a day. And I was like, how does anybody do that? And you do that by Google and just accumulating facts and putting together an article. And so I got there and literally had a quota of 7 articles a day, just about anything. I could, aggregate news. This is happening, write my own version, get a quote from that person, make it unique and put it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if it's luck that you run into these jobs, I do think that actually speaks volumes about what it means to be a journalist in terms of finding jobs and knowing the right people. And the same journalism skills that you use to put together an article of any length is the same journalism skills that you're ultimately using to try to find a job, to find the right people. And so now I'm trying to figure out how I can turn this into a question rather than just saying respond, Ross. But for our students who are listening to this, I do think that there's quite a bit of crossover between, like, yes, those journalism skills are involved in everything, finding the story and finding the job as well.
Yeah, I think when I first came to San Diego State, it was, I want to be a journalist. All of these interpersonal communications classes and broadcast journalism classes and public speaking classes, I remember thinking, because you always think you know more than you know, I don't need those. I've got that figured out. I did theater. I'm good. Those are the classes that taught me how to get my job. What I knew was the journalism stuff. Of course, I learned stuff in those classes too, but that was the stuff I was more confident in. The ability to go into a room and talk to people, or kind of identify when a job might be too good to be true, or when there's an opportunity there and they're just not seeing me for it, or kind of how to adjust my skill set to accommodate what it is they're looking for. I think that's all stuff you learn in communications. It's all stuff that you learn, for me, most valuably, internships and the early jobs I had. Those were what all talked. Almost everything I got when I was at San Diego State, I talked myself into. I don't really think it was a resume or anything on a page. It was the audacity and tenacity of this young person who just walked into a room and said, you're going to have to hire me. I belong here.
I love that. And I think that there's also something to be said for, when you're in college and you're trying to figure out yourself, you're trying to learn yourself. And for a lot of people, including myself, you're trying to overcome your shyness. I was this terribly shy kid. If you had me talking about baseball, okay, I'm fine. I can talk about baseball. But when it comes to talking to someone who I don't know yet, approaching someone, whether it's for a job or whether it's for a story, or even if it's, hey, are you waiting in line for this at East Commons? Or can I, there was like an inherent shyness for me. And you mentioned that you were this drama kid. I remember I took an acting for non-majors class. And the only reason why I took it is because two of my really good friends who were not journalists were taking that class. And we just thought it'd be a fun elective that all of us could take. And I'm glad that I took it, but it was terrifying for me to be on this small stage, even if it was other non-actors, was terrifying, but it also helped overcome the shyness. So they did have the audacity to walk into a room at some point and either get an interview or try to get a job in that room.
Yeah, well, I think, if I'm being honest, that's great. And I hear that all the time when we talk about that everybody should be forced to take a drama class at some point, because even as a theater kid, those classes were still scary for me. The first theater class I took at San Diego State, I'm the youngest person in the room. Of course, it's still scary for me. But my fear, I think, that was interesting, because I went to a performing arts high school, I came out of the closet my senior year. But then when I came to San Diego State, it was a whole different world. I never said anything. I mean, obviously, I'm sure people knew, but for me, it was also navigating, how do I fit into this world without being out, but also kind of doing what I want. And so I do think I channeled a lot of that energy into, well, I got to work for the paper. I got to get this internship. I got to go over here so that I can bury myself in activities and not think about this piece of me that I'm now hiding from the world. And the irony of that is, I get to the arts and entertainment desk. I get Jessica Yadigaran, and within 4 weeks, she's like, "You're gay, right?" I'm like, "Yes." And then we become best friends, and she's like, "Oh, thank God!" And we're hanging out. But that wasn't initially how it happened. And even then, it was like I was out to the arts and entertainment desk, but then it was slowly, and now this person on staff, and then by junior year, everybody knew. But it was a process, and so I definitely was guarded and shy in that respect.
Let's get into using journalism to really have an impact. Let's talk about working at advocate.com, especially because you were there during Prop 8, and that was, about same-sex marriage. Tell us about that time, and let's kind of get into like what it really meant to work for advocate.com during that very turbulent time, and not just California, but really for the world.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really weird time because it was the late, well, what do we call it? Not the 2000s, like 2007, 2008, that whole era. Advocate.com didn't exist. It was still a print publication, and they just put the print publication online. So they were basically creating a website that would update throughout the day as I was there. And I remember the blog, all we had was WordPress. Like there wasn't anything really fancy about it. But it was during Prop 8 and then during the presidential election and all of the stuff that went on that day. And we had this extreme high of Obama and then this extreme low of Prop 8 in California. And I remember, I had always done entertainment and travel and fluff stuff. And yeah, my columns had gotten more serious and I was inherently a political person, but I'd never done really hard news. And in that moment, obviously you have to lead with passion, but those are the moments that I really had to rely on the skills that I learned at San Diego State, because those were skills that not that I didn't use them. Of course, I'd always adhered to AP style, but just, getting your facts correct and making sure you source material correctly and all of the stuff that I didn't necessarily have to use on a daily basis. At the same time, covering news that's deeply personal to you and having to remain as impartial as a publication like The Advocate can. Obviously, The Advocate's not going to it's for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, The Advocate is like the #1 LGBTQ news magazine in the country. It's the oldest historically. It was born out of the Stonewall riots. Like if you're gay and a journalist, it's where you want to wind up. It's like the place. So being there during that time, it was a tremendous responsibility, but also a tremendous honor. And I remember getting to work with a really incredible staff of people, some of whom had been in this fight for equality for 25 to 30 years. And I'm this little 29-year-old coming in to edit 30-year-old, something like that, to edit advocate.com. And I've got like 50 and 55-year-old journalists who all of a sudden have to answer to me, who are incredibly talented in terms of writing and research, but had never worked in the .com space. And so they wanted to take the extra time with the articles. They weren't in we've got to get this out quickly mentality. And so it was a little difficult at first. A lot of people didn't really want to answer to me or respect me, but I think it also taught me that, respect goes both ways. And if I wanted them to respect me, I had to respect them. And I respected some of them tremendously. I met some of the most talented writers I've ever met in my life at The Advocate.
Some of my other biggest memories of just the amount of money that poured into both sides of Prop 8, not just in California, but from around the United States, from around the world, that it really seemed like the entire world decided that this ballot measure in California is going to lead to everything else, the rest of the world. And I'm wondering your memories on that. And again, just the pressure and just the unknowingness of how this is all going to shake out when you have so much money and you don't even know where all this money is coming from on both sides that's coming into this campaign.
Well, it's so funny because I remember at that time, the real quote unquote enemy of marriage equality was the Mormon Church. They were the ones funding most heavily the opposition to do away with marriage equality. I look at the Mormon Church now with what's going on in this country, and they're so quiet on these sets of issues. I think they realize that this isn't their hill to die on, and they've actually evolved a bit in this area. But at the time, I remember thinking, my God, they hate us so much. And I didn't understand it. But I also remember talking to my mom about Prop 8, who has always been, even before I came out, very, liberal in terms of civil rights, very much in support of marriage equality. And she said, of course I'm voting yes on 8. I believe in marriage equality. And I went, we're f***ed, because the language was flipped. And no on Prop 8 meant you supported marriage equality. And yes on Prop 8 meant you didn't. And I remember thinking, I don't even know if it's the money or that people are really that opposed to marriage equality. I think half of these voters don't even understand what they're voting for. And that actually is when I learned just how tricky language on ballot measures and in politics can be, and how diligent you have to be at educating yourself about politics if you want to get it right. And so I think also in that moment, even though I hadn't been a news writer, that's when I really started to take politics extremely seriously and paying very close attention to things that maybe didn't even affect my personal life because it affected somebody's personal life, and they deserve my respect to actually spend the time to learn about an issue that could forever upend who they are as a person. But it was a really scary time. And then, journalists are supposed to be impartial to a point, but then after Prop 8, folks were marching in the street, and of course I joined them and marched to the CNN tower. And it was a big time in the state, because essentially the state said that I don't have the same rights as you. And that's a really scary thing. And, not to get too political, but we're seeing it in this country again with a lot of marginalized communities. And it's a scary thing to have the government tell you that you're not worth the same as somebody else.
I think the idea of that I want to kind of dive into more here is you have this journalist on one side, and then you have like, well, this impacts me on the other side. And for whatever publication that someone works for, website for our students here, and just this balancing act that you have experienced to help our students in terms of sometimes you have to be completely objective based on who you're working for. But then there's other times that no, the point is not to, but you still need to get your facts right. And I wonder if you can kind of give more details about this balancing act of how you went about that and how you still go about that now.
Yeah, I mean, even at The Advocate, even when it was clear what our goals were and where we stood on certain issues as a publication, I would still have to interview folks who vehemently opposed my lifestyle and the things that we were writing about. It seems sort of funny now, but I don't know if you remember years ago, Carrie Prejean, Miss USA, who answered a question and was like vehemently opposed to marriage equality and wound up doing a whole bunch of crazy things and lost her crown. I sat in a room with her for 45 minutes and interviewed her, and I think I remained as impartial as possible. I'm totally capable of having a conversation with people who are vehemently opposed to me, and if they say it, I'll quote it. And if I can back it up factually, I will. And if I can't, I'll find the fact that debunks what it is they said to make the piece as balanced as possible. It's not easy. There are probably people that I would refuse interviewing. There are probably stories, especially in this current political climate, that I would say I'm just not giving that airtime. And I'll be honest, that's why I think I probably wouldn't do as well in journalism today. And part of the reason why I've segued into the career I've segued into, because a lot of these reporters, we talk about it all the time, for those who are opposed to Trump, stop giving the man airtime. Well, all of these news outlets continue to do it. And if I were a young reporter, I don't think I could do that. I don't know that I'd be able to live with myself if I was consistently giving people that I felt were detrimental to this country that sort of airtime. So it is a challenge. And I think, with any career, it becomes about your personal morals and what you're willing to do. I think it's always good to be as impartial as possible, but we're all human beings. We all have morals and opinions and ideas. And if there's something at the end of the day that you're just like, I just don't know if I'm going to sleep well at night knowing that I took part in this, I think that's where the question comes and why this career's become a pretty difficult one.
Well, speaking of what you're currently doing, let's segue into that. You work for the It Gets Better project. I think most people who are listening to this podcast probably are aware, but why don't you give us the background of how the It Gets Better project began and how you got involved with it?
Yeah, so it started as a viral video movement in 2010, and there were just an upswing in reported suicides as a result of bullying young people, mostly middle and high school, who were gay or perceived to be gay, who had been bullied mercilessly in school and decided in a moment of desperation that their only out was to take their own life. And our founder, Dan Savage, recorded a video that essentially was just like, I would just love an opportunity to be in a room with these kids as like a self-actualized, successful adult gay person and let them know it gets better. You get out of high school, you move out of your hometown, you find your community, you get an education, you find what interests you, you find what you're going to do with the rest of your life, and all of this sort of goes away. And not that the world becomes perfect around you or that everything gets better, but you become more equipped to deal with it. And it very quickly caught on. Tons of celebrities, politicians, Obama recorded an It Gets Better video. We won an Emmy, all sorts of amazing stuff. And it's evolved into the organization that it's today, which is a global organization that really founds itself in getting in front of kids before they're in crisis, getting in front of kids before they feel like they need to call that suicide hotline or cause themselves harm. Getting in front of them with educational resources, connecting them to community support, putting them in touch with adults that really support their journey, and just, really equipping them with the resources to go out and navigate this world. Because when you're young, every day feels like an eternity. And you talked about being painfully shy. If you have a really bad day at school, you feel like this is never going to end. But the fact is, it does. And when you're surrounded by a community that supports you, and peers and friends and adults who are really rooting for you, that can have a huge impact on your mental health and your well-being and your scholastic performance. It can really be life-changing. And so that's the work we're doing through storytelling, educational resources, community building. We're on Twitch, we do live gaming competitions, all sorts of crazy stuff. But I actually got involved in the early days, leaving The Advocate, and in another attempt to discover something new. I really wanted to try out TV. I wanted to be a TV writer. And so I went to meet with Dan Savage and his producing partner that was working on a show for MTV. And they said, we can help each other here. We'll show you the TV ropes, but we've got this nonprofit, It Gets Better, that's getting off the ground. And none of us understand social media, and none of us understand the journalism and the marketing of it or the blog. And I was like, well, I got that. So we kind of helped each other out. And I did that for a year and a half. And then I left and went and did a whole ton of other things and got experience in TV and nonprofit and all sorts of stuff. And then I came back to It Gets Better about 3 years ago as a communications director.
How did you even get in touch with Dan Savage? Tell that story it's
once again, it's all, I swear the best things in life come from meeting people and just talking to them and finding out what it is they do and who they know. My best friend who lived in LA, one of his best friends from high school, worked for Dan Savage. And I was talking to him about wanting to get into TV. And he said, you should really meet Dan's producing partner. They need to hire somebody else for this company, even if you just come in and have a conversation and talk about the work you're doing at The Advocate. And really, if you think about it, it wasn't all that different. I'm reporting on issues that are important to the LGBTQ community. They've got a nonprofit that's really trying to speak to queer youth and get in front of them, early stages, and how do we best communicate that message? It wasn't a huge leap. The TV thing was a total learning curve, but I went into the interview. I think we really got along really well. His dog jumped on my lap, and I guess that was all he needed. And, I tell these stories, and I get it. If I was listening, I'm like, this guy just has all the luck. This seems very charmed. But I really do think it goes back to what we were talking about, that communication as a whole is just this huge basket of skills that you accumulate over the years. And I learned early on that I was not the person that was ever going to get the job based on my resume. I was never going to get the job based on applying on LinkedIn or on Indeed or on any of these platforms. Maybe get in the door with my cover letter because I can be really persuasive in writing. But for me, it's my personality and my ability to connect with people one-on-one. And so I've always had to approach it with, here are some places I'd love to work. How do I find somebody that has an in there? And how do I get in front of those people so that they see that we're going to really collaborate well together? And it doesn't always work. There have been some times that I've been like, this is my dream job. And I get in the room and they're like, oh, we don't like you. It happens. But more often than not, that's how I've done it.
I can also share that whenever I see a job that interests me, one of the first things that I do is I'll go to their website and just look at, okay, who works there already? Okay, is there any names that I already know? Is there any names on there that, well, I know somebody who knows there? And then I start to just think about, well, who do I know who might possibly know somebody who is on this list? And a lot of times those people who I'm calling are my friends from San Diego State, who are my former colleagues at the Daily Aztec. Just to reiterate this idea of yes, is there someone who you know who can at least say, hey, look at this guy's resume so that it's not just another one that got produced from LinkedIn. So that I can at least hope that I can get someone to stare at it longer than 3 seconds. Maybe they give it a 30-second glimpse. Yeah. And that's not one of the first things I do with anytime there's a job that interests me.
No, I completely agree. You have to do that because think of how many people are out there competing for a job. If you get an email from somebody that you're friends with, whose opinion you respect, and it's simply like, hey, I've got this friend who's applied for this job. I can vouch for them. They're a really great guy. You should meet with them. Aren't you going to kick that to the top of the pile rather than go through these 100 resumes, none of whom you know, none of whom like mean anything to you on a personal level? I'm always going to take. Of course, that could work both ways. You could also get a recommendation from somebody you don't particularly respect, and then you're
Right.
like, oh. But so you got to be careful with the people you're using as a reference.
Let's talk about 50 states, 50 grants. Tell us about this project and what makes you so proud of this project.
So one of our newest initiatives that It Gets Better is called 50 States, 50 Grants. And it's really born out of this upswing in legislation and bills targeting LGBTQ students around the country, particularly trans students. And it's targeting everything from access to inclusive books. And that's not just gay people, that's Black communities, brown communities, Asian communities, women's studies, any marginalized voice. It's bathroom bills. It's attempting to prevent trans kids from participating in sports. It's all sorts of things. And so we came up with this grant program that awards at least one grant in all 50 states, ideally, and Canada, to projects designed to uplift and empower LGBTQ students. And it's students in conjunction with teachers who apply for these grants. And we're funding everything from getting inclusive literature back into libraries to a school's first Pride Parade to gender sexuality alliances at school to gender inclusive closets to curriculum that helps inform teachers about proper pronoun use and inclusive language. But the kids really come up with the projects themselves and apply in conjunction with the teacher. And it's really just our way of putting some power back in the hands of students who are seeing it yanked away from them on a really local level. And the idea is if you can change something in one or two or three schools, maybe that has a ripple effect and it changes in more schools throughout your state.
When it comes to a project like this, 50 states, 50 grants, where does it begin? Are you sitting around a room, and people are bouncing ideas off each other? Where does the idea like this begin? And then how long does it take before you can actually start to put the different things in place so that you can actually create it?
Well, something like this is twofold. What's interesting about the nonprofit world is obviously you are reliant on donors and supporters. And so in the case of 50 States, 50 Grants, we have a lot of really great brand partners. And American Eagle, which is a brand everybody knows, has been one of our supporters for 6, going on 7 years. And they started this campaign during Pride Month where, when you go to the grocery store and they're like, would you like to round up for Children's Hospital? Well, they literally did that at American Eagle, except it was for the It Gets Better project. We thought it would make 50, 100,000. The first year it made $1.1 million.
Wow.
People just were really passionate about it. And with that kind of money as a nonprofit, you have to donate you have to put a certain amount of that money toward your cause. It can't go toward growing the staff or getting a new office. It really needs to be toward your mission. And so they're really invested in investing locally. And so we came up with this concept of doing something in all 50 states on kind of a grassroots level, really reinvesting in the communities that invested in the It Gets Better project. Because American Eagle as a corporate donor has supported us for years. But if you think about it, this is really a project that's funded by you, me, and anybody who went and bought a t-shirt in the month of June, quite honestly, and said, sure, you can have my extra 50 cents. And in many cases said, because they're reading about the nonprofit, this is really cool, make it $10. Mm-hmm. A lot of people they give a lot more than that roundup. And so that's how it started.
If someone is hearing this and they go, wow, I really want to work for the It Gets Better project. I want to learn more from Ross. How often do you guys hire? Do you hire interns? Do you do remote? Is it purely in the office? What should people know about working for It Gets Better?
Well, the one thing that people should know about working for a nonprofit in particular is that most of us are a lot smaller than you'd think. The It Gets Better project is a global organization with 16 employees. So we've tripled in terms of staff size. This is interesting. We actually thrived during the pandemic, which sounds weird, but because we're primarily in the digital space, and a lot of students were not able to go to school, not able to meet with their GSAs. A lot of LGBT centers were not able to, open their facilities for in-person meetings. Folks found community through our content and through our social media channels online. So we have had to hire a lot of new people. I think we're at a process now where we're kind of we've reached capacity for a little while and we're not actively hiring. But there are a ton of nonprofits that work in this space that do a lot of really important work. And I think for anybody who wants to work at a nonprofit, I think one of the myths are that we're all broke. We don't make like a pittance, we're not rich, but you can make a perfectly good salary working at a nonprofit. But it is work that I think you will do your best work if you're really passionate about the cause that you're working for. I couldn't just go and work for any nonprofit. It's not that I'm not passionate about cancer research. I've lost family members to cancer. I care about it, but it's not that thing that like keeps me up at night where I think, how can I personally contribute to make a difference in this industry? There are far better people out there equipped to do that work. For me, it's got to be that work that like tugs at my soul and I care so deeply about it that I can't think about doing anything else. Because otherwise I would go to corporate America and be a communications person and make twice as much. But anytime I think I'm going to do that, I just remind myself that 95% of the time I end my workday and I'm like, I have a good job. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a lot of people who can say that. And that to me is worth a lot more than money.
Let me have you reflect on that just a little bit more with the backdrop of when you started at San Diego State and you thought that you were going to be this editor of this magazine in New York. And if someone had told you, actually, you're going to work for a nonprofit, it's called It Gets Better, and it's going to be able to help people in these ways. Like, what would you have thought about just this future Ross job when you were 18 years old?
Well, I mean, the first 5 weeks at San Diego State, I would have been like, what are you talking about? I'm not gay. And then once I was out, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have said, I don't think that that's my journey. Like, I don't know anybody really that works in nonprofit. I don't really understand that world. And even when I came to work for It Gets Better in the first place, it was to get into TV. It was because I wanted to write for a TV show. And I got very lucky and I got to experiment with that a little. And, I wrote a few episodes for TV and that was really cool. And I realized that TV moves really slow. And you know what doesn't move really slow? Journalism. You can't go from writing 7 articles a day to writing 1 script every 5 weeks. I was bored. But no, I don't think I would have believed you if you said I was going to work for a nonprofit, because I was that kid who was like, oh, I've got my life mapped out. I got this. And I don't really think life ever turns out how you think it's going to.
Can definitely agree with that. I can agree with that on a lot of different levels. Okay, one of the things we like to do in closing out these episodes is to brag about other SDSU alums who are doing things underneath the communications umbrella, whatever that might be, so that we can continue to just share the word with people about how our alums are awesome. So who do you want to brag about?
Well, you said I could do more than one. I'm going to do this quickly. I got to shout out my 2 Daily Aztec besties, Jessica Yadigaran, who you've already had on the show. Go back and listen to her episode. She's amazing. Great writer. The other one is Lisa Ritchie, now Lisa Cashman, currently working at the Salk Institute, doing some amazing things with fundraising and grant research for their medical programs, and soon to be at a different organization, depending on when this comes out, I'm not going to say, but also working in the nonprofit space, doing some really cool stuff. And, she wanted to go into film, and for a while worked at Universal Pictures, and somehow we've both wound up in nonprofit. And I think that's kind of cool. 2 of the best friends I've ever made. The other 2 I want to shout out worked with me at the Daily Aztec, and they're twins, Lisa and Irene Yadao. And they both went the journalism route and have now kind of wound up making short documentary films for marginalized, specifically AAPI communities, making films that really talk about that experience and tell stories that we haven't heard. And again, kind of sort of along the lines of what I do. Like, It Gets Better as a storytelling organization. They're out there doing these important documentary films. They've worked with some amazing people. They just work with Lisa Ling, who anybody who's a journalist respects that name. I mean, I think it's so cool that we were all kind of there at the same time. We're all doing different things, but in our way, successful.
A footnote on Jessica Yadigaran, she actually has a new job. When we interviewed her for the podcast last semester, she was working for the Bay Area News Group, and she now works for sfgate.com. And I was just the other day, in fact, I was catching up on a lot of the articles that she writes for sfgate.com. So that's super exciting.
Well, I guess I owe Jessica an email.
Yes, you do.
Know that, so I will reach out.
Yes, she has moved over to SF Gate. The person that I want to highlight, this was fairly recent news, again, depending on when this podcast actually comes out, is that there is a new editor for the San Diego Union Tribune, and she is a San Diego State alum. I apologize that I don't know 100% exactly how to pronounce her name. I believe it's Laura Cicalo, Cicalo. It might be Chicalo. But she has worked for more than 3 decades at the San Diego Union Tribune, and she is a lifelong resident of San Diego County, and she is now in charge of the paper. And we know that it's very challenging times for the newspaper industry. The UT has a new publisher yet again. I think I still have some PTSD about the new publisher from when that publisher was my employer, but I'm rooting for newspapers to continue and to thrive, and I'm wanting the best for Laura, and hopefully we'll have her as a guest at some point on this podcast. So all the best to Laura as she begins her new job editing the UT.
I'm gonna follow that shout out. I don't know you, Laura, but knowing everything that you just said, I'm thinking of you. But that's amazing.
Well, this was amazing, Ross. I'm really glad that we were able to connect. I appreciate your honesty and your candidness and sharing the different things that you've done with your career. It's been really fun to listen and learn, and hopefully we get to meet in person one day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, that is Ross von Metzke. He is the Senior Director of Communications and PR for the It Gets Better project. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can go to the website, which is, give them the website in case they want to get more details, Ross.
Itgetsbetter.org.
Itgetsbetter.org. All right, that's going to wrap up this week's edition of the Where You At podcast. A friendly reminder that we want to hear from you, alums. Let us know what you're doing with your careers. You can donate money to the department. You can speak as a guest speaker. You can mentor. There's a lot of different ways that you can get involved in the JMS at San Diego State so that we can continue to grow the program. Or just tell us what other people are doing, what you're doing, so that we can let others know, all the successful alums. My name is Josh Asushan. I'm your host, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person, or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.